Five Nights at Freddy's has some absolutely amazing music. I mean, I even made a whole hour-long video talking about how good the music is. But which songs are the worst and which songs are the best? Well, in this video, I'll be working that out and ranking every single music track from the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise from worst to best, which there are 119 of. I'll be ranking these songs on how well they are used in the games that they are in, as well as how good the song is by itself. I'll be analysing the same songs from my previous video, but I won't be discussing any ambient tracks, only the musical soundtracks. So FNAF 4's ambience doesn't count, but Circus from Five Nights at Freddy's 1 does. And keep the first rule of the ranking in mind, because how effective the horror music is will play a factor. And the last thing, any tracks that have different variation, like the glitched versions of Five Nights at Freddy's Day and Night sections, will be combined just so the list doesn't get too complicated or too repetitive. Also, make sure to stay to the end of the video while I'll rank all the games on their overall OST. But since this is going to be a super long video, be sure to grab a snack and enjoy. You guys seem to enjoy the longer videos anyway, so I really hope you enjoyed this one. If you could just like the video to help the algorithm, that would be amazing. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into the ranking. In last place, we actually have a group of tracks since I couldn't figure out which one of these was the worst. But in saying that, the 7 security breach ending cutscene tracks are tied for the worst FNAF OST. Each of one of these tracks all suck for the exact same reason. There's no emotion to them. The strongest one out of these ones is the Gregory in the alley ending, and even that is drawn down by the fact that you just don't care about Gregory. These tracks are also very subtle too, since you're normally looking at the god-awful animation and comic book style ending that just suck the joy out of the experience. Overall, these tracks are held down by the game that they take place in, which is really unfortunate since despite this game's quality or lack thereof, the soundtrack is actually one of my favourites, since it features some of the highest highs in the entire series. However, it also features some of the lowest lows, and we are not done with Security Breach. Now look, I'm sure I will get a lot of hate for this one, but in my opinion, I think that this minigame has really bad music. A lot of Five Nights at Freddy's minigame music is at the very least good, but I just don't think that this track fits the minigame at all, and it's actually really bad. The weird jumpy track is just really forgetful and very strange, and also very unpleasant to listen to. There's not much more I can actually say about this track. Like the character who stars in the minigame, this track just sucks. So I will have to cut this track some slack since it's not really taking place in something serious, but the high school chica cutscenes that take place when you beat Knights in Ultimate Custom Night are quite frankly terrible, and the music in it is super forgetful. It's not that the track itself is all that bad, but there's no actual qualities that make it memorable, and for that, it gets this spot. These two pieces are very similar to the last piece we just discussed, where you just don't remember the track even though it's not that bad at all. This track is definitely better than the high school soap opera, however I just don't think that tracks like this one or the high school one should take place in a Five Nights at Freddy's game of all places. It feels very out of place, and for that I can't put it any higher. The Mystic Hippo music from Help Wanted 2 is this low on the list for one main reason. And that is that this music just doesn't fit Five Nights at Freddy's at all, and to be honest, it's a very lazy attempt at generic fortune-telling music. As someone who actually has a lot of experience with this kind of music, since my mother is really into all the chakras and all that jazz, I can tell you firsthand that this is very bad music for this scene. The only reason it's not lower is that the experience is in VR, so it is just a little bit interesting, but honestly, this just sucks. This is the music from the Fazbear Blast Western minigame, and this is going to fall into the minigame music category, where the music does nothing but set the player up for a minigame experience, but not much more than that. And this, in my opinion, is the worst one, simply because I think it's really boring and just doesn't fit the level at all, in my opinion. The Bonnie Bowl, in my opinion, suffers from not fitting with the minigame, however, it's definitely better than the last one. The reason I think this music doesn't fit is because when I think of going bowling, I think of super exciting music, similar to the Feather Blast music from Security Breach. However, this reminds me of the golf minigame of all things, so for that, I have to put it this low on the list. So here we have the first piece of music from Five Nights at Freddy's World, which is a game that I think has an amazing soundtrack. However, I won't deny that this track just isn't that great. It feels like a very generic rock tune used for a boss fight, and considering all the music that actually is in this game, this again just feels lazy. It's very forgetful, and there's not much more I can say beyond that. This track plays during the hard mode version of the Parts and Service Bonnie minigame, and I'll be completely honest, this music is really terrible for this minigame. The original minigame is absolutely terrifying, but this version isn't remotely scary. Now, part of that is to do with Neon Bonnie's design, yes, but most of it has to do with the music in my opinion, which I think just doesn't fit at all. And while I suppose if you look at it as circus music it could work, the thing is this isn't the minigame to do it in. If this minigame was playing in one of the Curse of Dreadbear minigames, it would have fit so much better. But for what minigame this takes place in, I gotta put it here at number 105. So for this spot, I'm putting an entire OST, since there is literally no difference between any of the tracks. And I also don't know how many there are, so anyway. So here we have Ruin's whole soundtrack. It was actually really hard to figure out which songs were just ambience, which songs were music, or which were even separate from each other, which is why they are all bunched together. But for why it's so low on the list? Well, like the Security Breach ending, it completely fails at what it is trying to do. The soundtrack is designed to be for a horror game, and this game failed so spectacularly at that. There's so much wrong with this soundtrack, and because of that, I have to leave it where it is. Next up, we have the mini golf intro music from the mini golf arcade game in Security Breach. Now, I should start by saying that compared to our last few songs, the quality of this one has been pushed up slightly. However, the reason for why this song is where it is because it is just an arcade golf sounding version of the main Security Breach theme, which, don't get me wrong, is absolutely amazing. However, this is easily the weakest version of that track, considering it's pretty bare bones in an optional minigame in a very huge experience. However, I will give credit where credit is due, since the actual vibe of the track is quite pleasant, although unfortunately it just isn't as good as the rest of the tracks in Security Breach. Now, this may surprise some people, but here we have the FNAF 6 credits music, which isn't that bad at all. However, it is a little boring. Now, obviously it works as the end credits music, however, in my opinion, I think it's really weak. This music comes after one of the best ending sequences of all time, and it feels unnecessary. Overall, this piece is just overshadowed and forgettable compared to the rest of FNAF 6's music. To be honest, this minigame is really terrible, and part of that is 100% because of this music. It is really boring, and honestly is just way too relaxing. This is definitely one of the weakest pieces of minigame music in all of Five Nights at Freddy's. Way too relaxing, and the minigame being bad just doesn't help either. And here we have the diner theme from Into the Pit. And to be honest, the only reason this is here is just that it's a little bit forgettable. Although the Toreador Easter egg is very nice. It's just that this track is just not one that is super memorable. What is the official FNAF 1 animatronic show music? Well, this is it. However, can I be honest? I have heard so many better versions of the potential songs they would sing, and that's just really a personal preference, honestly. But again, it's just really forgetful, and that's all I can really say about it. And considering it's for an Easter egg that's not too common, it doesn't get a lot of use. I actually remember this track more from the Glitz attraction, which is actually wild. And here we have the little jingle at the end of fights in Five Nights at Freddy's World. Now, this is honestly really good, and it does work for what it's going for. The only reason it's so low is because it's not a very memorable track, it's probably the least important in the game that it's in, and although FNAF World has some amazing music, this by comparison just doesn't hit as hard. To be honest, this track is very stupid, and it's only as high as it is because I too find it funny, but it's really the least effective musical track in all of Five Nights at Freddy's, and it doesn't serve much to the story, or the gameplay, or even to the actual horror. It is just a 3-second loop on repeat, to create humour of all things. I think it's just more memorable than the last few tracks, which is why it's here on the list. So, Freddy in Space has 4 tracks, and this one, while not as bad as the Scott boss fight music, is still kinda lame. And I'm gonna spoil the next 2 tracks because they are the other Freddy in Space tracks, so let's just get into it. It's amazing that the title screen for Freddy in Space has better music than most of the tracks in the actual game itself. That's actually crazy. Although there is one more track, which is... While still not amazing, this did the best job at being ambient music for Freddy in Space, but that won't save it from being this low on the list. Okay, I'm sensing a pattern here. FNAF World has a great soundtrack, but all of the Halloween tracks are just not that good. Maybe it's because of it being rushed, but who knows? Anyways, this track is forgettable like the rest, so yeah, moving on. Look, it's not that I think this track is necessarily bad, it does serve its purpose, but just being a reverse version of the Battle and Hub World music just isn't that interesting, nor is it executed very well, so I have to put it this low on the list. So here we have another FNAF 6 minigame track, which, I'm gonna be completely honest, I didn't even know what minigame this was from until making this video. Turns out it's from the fun minigame where Helpy fucking dies. But otherwise, I don't know, it's just really forgetful. I find it funny that the hardest FNAF World minigame has such chill music, because this just doesn't fit at all, and if I'm being completely honest, the soundtrack is easily the most forgettable part of this minigame, although most of that is because of the difficulty of the actual minigame. Ultimate Custom Night has a bunch of music, and most of it isn't actually that interesting. And the title screen / custom night / settings menu? I don't even know what the music that plays when you're selecting animatronics AI. Whatever that music is, it's honestly kinda boring and forgettable, and honestly everything else we are going to see is so much better, so let's just move on. The Help 1 and 2 credits are actually pretty cool to listen to on their own. However, in my opinion, this track is held back by being a bit too similar to the Rockstar Road music from Security Breach. And speaking of Security Breach, now you may be surprised to see this track so low on the list, but I have a very good reason as to why. Five Nights at Freddy's menu music is meant to tease the player on the upcoming experience, and in a way, it gets them excited for what's going to happen. However, if you look at Security Breach's title music and then look at the game, yeah, this music just does not work, and it actually goes against the game in my opinion. It would have been better if it was just the main menu theme, which plays right afterwards. So I don't even know, to be honest, this just doesn't work. So here we have another track that is actually quite good for what it is, and serves quite well as title screen music. But it is a little bit quiet and boring. However, it still works, and this is where we start getting into the tracks that at the very least work for the section that they are in. Five Nights at Freddy's has honestly been completely forgotten, although the music is pretty good. Out of the 3 tracks, the Sinkhole is definitely the weakest of the 3 tracks. It's just not very exciting, and it doesn't really get you into the race at all. The Five Nights at Freddy's menu music is actually a little bit underwhelming, if I'm being completely honest. The rest of this game's music is very exciting and it gets you pumped, while this, in my opinion, is just a bit too chill, but it's still not all that bad. The Fruity Maze music is actually quite pleasant to listen to, with this high-pitched little jingle. However, it is just a little bit too generic compared to the rest of the minigames that exist in this game, and it does get a little bit annoying because of how high-pitched it is. The basketball minigame music is actually quite nice and very fitting for the minigame, but there's not much else I can really say. It is very generic. Sister Location's soundtrack is quite interesting, and this track is probably the most generic with the most typical sounding drama soap opera show music I've ever heard, which I just don't think fits a FNAF game in my opinion, so that's why it's so low. Now we have the demo music from FNAF Pizza Sim. When players first saw FNAF 6, they were greeted with this, thinking that it was just a little minigame on its own with not much else, before revealing that it was an entire new full-on release and was meant to be the last game in the series, which makes me wonder why it was going to be a troll, but anyways, this music serves its purpose, but it is very generic and honestly quite forgettable in the grand scheme of things, so with that, I can't place it any higher. Five Nights at Freddy's World has a variety of battle music, and this one is played whenever the player finds a new character while roaming the world. It's quite pleasant, and it serves its purpose well, being a bit mysterious to fit with seeing a brand new enemy that will eventually be in your party. Overall, it's not too bad. So now we have the boss battle music from Five Nights at Freddy's World. It definitely has a more sinister feel than the normal battle music, and it definitely serves its purpose well, just like the previous track. However, I won't lie that this music is just a bit generic for a game that normally has a killer soundtrack, but I can let it slide this time. The Halloween section is definitely one of the weaker parts of the game, and this path is the one you take when you're on your way to defeating the Rainbow Boss, and the music is actually quite fitting, being mysterious and a little tense, but it's not much, but nor does it need to be. It's a fitting little track that serves its purpose and nothing more. Probably the track most associated with the Halloween style of Five Nights at Freddy's, even though I know people who actually think this is from the Fredbear DLC and not FNAF world, but it still fits this world really well, and that is easily the best of the Halloween DLC music tracks in FNAF world. It's got this mystery that not many other tracks have, and it works surprisingly well for what it is. Overall, this is a good track, but the Halloween DLC just isn't important enough, nor is this track strong enough to get it any higher on the list. This Help Wanted track is very creepy and is extremely startling the first time you hear it. I love how Five Nights at Freddy's can make music boxes just sound off and really unsettling and creepy. This track works extremely well for the game it is in, although there is one track that's slightly better. And that track is this one, playing from the final minigame ever at the pizza party, which arguably features the most terrifying ending of any FNAF game, witnessing a child get lured into the back room by the yellow rabbit before being trapped in the Freddy suit. This is actually one of the few really terrifying moments where we get to witness this firsthand, and a part of the FNAF games that I think has been really neglected and underutilized. I think FNAF has turned the idea of children being murdered and made it into a bit of a meme, which I may actually make into a full video if enough of you are interested. So comment below if you want to see me talk about that. But anyways, enough self-promo. This music is really creepy, and it works exceptionally well for the minigame. And at this point, we are starting to get into the tracks that both fit the vibe of the scene and are just really good tracks on their own. So let's start moving on. Now look, this track isn't actually that important, but it is an absolute bop of a tune, and it's so fun, so I had to put it here. To be honest, there's not much else to say. Let's move on. The FNAF World menu music is where the menu music starts to become more effective, and actually memorable than the previous games. This track gets the player super hyped and excited for the adventure ahead, and is very good at getting the player excited. It's pretty good, and it is a very enjoyable listen by itself. Pretty good, but it's brought down by the rest of the tracks on this list. Chipper's Revenge is also the FNAF World ending music, and I actually think this track works exceptionally well for its purposes. It works as a very unconventional ending to a very unconventional game. Plus, when you hear this track with Chipper, you know that you are going beyond the end of the game and that you are in a fight for your life. This is a great track, but we still aren't done with FNAF World. Our first hub world has a very relaxing and calming tune that works pretty well for the first world, as we haven't really gone through any of the challenges yet and we are just easing into the experience. Overall, it's a really nice tune. Our next FNAF World Hub music is the Mine Shaft, which works quite well, being very mysterious and creepy while still keeping up the adventure theme. Very epic. Pretty similar to the last piece, this hub music works very well, but it doesn't do much more than that, so I have to leave it here. So now we get to the first of the two absolutely amazing tracks from 5 Laps at Freddy's, a game that was completely forgotten about the day after release. This track and its nighttime variant take a lot of inspiration from the original Smashing Windshields theme, which works super well for a racing game, and also fits super well with the visuals, and it's part of the reason this is my favourite track in the entire game. Well, I mean there's only 3, but whatever. This track is only held back by the fact that it's a bit too similar to the original track, and it just doesn't stand that well on its own without it, but it's still an absolute banger regardless. Now for the best of the 5 Nights at Freddy's tracks, Fazbear Hills is probably the most unique of all these tracks, being upbeat and super fun for a racing game. However, what makes this track stand out so much is actually the nighttime mode, which has one of the coolest tracks in the entire 5 Nights at Freddy's series in my opinion. It's actually really underrated and I really want to analyze it more and try to implement it into future videos. But anyways, this track is awesome and we can move on from this game and let it continue to be forgotten, since apparently they aren't adding multiplayer. What the fuck? Okay. I know a lot of you are going to be mad at me for this, so let me explain why I've put this track so low. While yes, this track is just as iconic as the original FNAF 1 menu music, I actually think it's a bit weak in comparison. Don't get me wrong, it still works as menu music, but it doesn't really do anything beyond that and is just generic menu music. It's still way better and way more iconic than the previous games, which is why it's not low on the list, but I don't think this track's menu is as good as the others, and for that, I have to leave it here. FNAF 4's menu music, in my opinion, is about the same quality as FNAF 2's menu music, but I just think that it works a tad better. But honestly, there's not much else for me to say here that I didn't already say in the FNAF 2 section, so let's just move on. Now next up, we have the UCN office music, and to be honest, they all serve the exact same purpose, and they are all pretty much exactly the same. They all sound the same, so I'm going to speedrun through these just to save some time. This is the same as the last one, but it sounds better and works more. This is the same as the last one, but it sounds better and it works more. This is the same as the last one, but it sounds better and it works more. This is the same as the last one, but it sounds better and it works more. Oh my god, I'm repeating myself too much. Even though this is only a couple of notes on an old piano, I think this is easily the most effective of all of Ultimate Castle Knight's music. This really creepy music on the Twitching Golden Freddy just works. But with that, we are done with Ultimate Castle Knight. Let's move on, please. The Mini Music Man sections in Security Breach use the same idea as the title screen music, but adapts it and uses it way more effectively. However, it does remind me a little too much of the title screen, and I'm gonna be honest, if this thing is able to kill you, you actually suck. But you don't suck if you can beat the next minigame. Okay, by the way, the Runaway is the name of the music track, not the minigame itself. That's Gravity Vortex. But, speaking of which, this minigame is stupidly hard. Gravity Vortex is actually insane, and quite a pain to try and beat even once. But this music makes it all the worth the while in my opinion. It's super upbeat and fun, and it just works. Sister Location doesn't have many secrets, even though it totally should have, and the Turtle Crusher minigame is one of the only ones. But even though I don't like this minigame, I won't deny that the music is actually really good here, and works quite well, but that's all I can really say about it. The music for the map of your custom pizzeria is just so fun, and although that's all I can really say, you have to appreciate how well FNAF 6 actually used very similar sounding tracks and picked the best ones to make it work, like the next one. For music that's meant to show that you were getting sued, which is actually really terrible in real life, not that I have any experience of course, but in the world of FNAF, you apparently get this fun little jingle, and it honestly just works so well. The Gator Golf section has a very fitting soundtrack, although if I'm being completely honest, it does feel a little generic for a Security Breach soundtrack, but at the same time, I can't really hold it to too much of a standard. It still works exceptionally well for what it is. Want a Mexican restaurant? Well, very stereotypical traditional Mexican music aside, I won't deny this track 100% works for the section that it's in, although L-Chips isn't explored that much, so I can't place it any higher. This is an unused FNAF World track that I think that would have been used for the cave in World 3 of FNAF World, and I'll be honest, I wish they included it. It actually works super well, and it's really nice to listen to. However, because it's unused, I can't place it any higher. The Snow World of Five Nights at Freddy's World is the first time that the game throws a soundtrack towards you that feels a bit off or even creepy. This is quite an effective soundtrack for the Snow World, and it personally makes it one of my favourites, with a surprising amount of personality. Hollow Dance from Into the Pit is probably the most well-known piece of music from the game, and for good reason. It's amazing ambient music and really captures the feeling of the 8-bit Atari-style world the game is going for, and as well as the location of Freddy's as a whole. However, the reason this track is so low is that it's really just the same thing over and over and over again. Even with different variations, it's just not as interesting as some of the other tracks coming up ahead. Fazzablast, in my opinion, is one of the most criminally underrated places in the entire Pizzaplex, and the ambient soundtrack is also super underrated in my opinion, creating an amazing feeling. However, it is just ambience, so let's just move on. The dance floor music only plays when you discover the rocking DJ Music Man, which is just epic. However, it's not as epic as the next few pieces of music. The West Arcade has to be one of the most inviting places and have one of the most inviting ambiences in all of Security Breach. There's this sense of wonder and excitement, and it's in my opinion one of the coolest areas in the entire game. However, it is just ambience, so we will move on. The Fazzablast section in Security Breach has to be one of the most fun and exhilarating experiences in any FNAF game. And this track actually works super well as a super fun yet tense moment. It actually puts you on edge and makes you check behind your back at all times. To be honest, I think this was a little bit overkill, since the track works so well, but the minigame itself is a bit underwhelming, but it's still a banger. So in this spot, I am putting every single Into the Pit minigame track, since they all basically sound the exact same. But I think that Into the Pit has some really good ambient music, especially in the minigames, and I think for that alone, it deserves to be where it is on the list. The Sister Location Custom Night is one of the highlights of the game in my opinion, and that's the same with the soundtrack. This track works super well with the nights and really pulls you into the experience. However, there's one track that works a little bit better in my opinion. Our first real boss fight music, and it's actually really well crafted. While personally not one of my favourites, I think it does quite a good job setting up the private room and the character of Enid. Even though this night overstays its welcome in my opinion, being a whole 9 minutes long, this track makes it at least somewhat enjoyable. It's a really cool idea, and it's still a shining diamond in what is a very mediocre gaming experience, and this track helps it shine through the rubble. You beat FNAF 2! Congrats! You get this very unique music box tune that is only present here and in Help Wanted for some reason, but this tune once again is about defeating your enemies, which is very fitting. However, it doesn't get used enough to place any higher, and is honestly a very underrated track. Starting a shift in Sister Location is both a joy and a curse with this music. You have a nice start to the shift, but now you know it's all downhill from here. This was the first time that music played before the shift started, and it actually worked quite well for the time. However, there's one track that works slightly better. Completing a shift in sister location is an amazing feeling thanks to this music. This bright and happy celebratory music is honestly really well executed, and is only beaten out by the original chimes of FNAF 1, FNAF 2, and FNAF 3, which I didn't include on the list since it repeated way too much of different variations. I mean, no I didn't, I actually just completely forgot about this to be honest. But if you want to know where it would go, it would be right after this one at number 37.5, so there you go. Out of all the Help Wanted 2 minigames, this was the only one that actually frightened me, and the soundtrack was definitely a big reason for that. This creepy carnival ride startled me so many times during this game, and it definitely works as a horror track. There's not much else to say, this worked well. FNAF 1 has a lot of ambient sounds designed to put the player on edge and scare them as time goes on, and Foxy's song from FNAF 1 definitely does that. I nearly didn't include this track because it is only 10 seconds, however I think that it does such an effective job that it deserves to be a tad higher and actually be on the list. But if you disagree with me on this, I do understand, but it's my list, so I don't know, deal with it. Out of the two random musical motifs that can play in FNAF 1, I have to say that I think Circus is the most effective of the two. It basically does the same thing as the Foxy song, adding to the ambient horror of the entire game. In saying that, I think that Circus is way more effective, as it just feels more supernatural and more out of place than the Foxy song. But in saying that, it is just the 20-second sound effect, so I can't place it any higher. FNAF 3 is probably my favourite of the original games, but you'd be surprised to know that it doesn't actually have my favourite title screen music. However, in saying that, I absolutely love the return of the static-filled title screen music that the original FNAF 1 menu music had. It almost feels like a remastered version of the original track. Overall, this track has a lot of nostalgia and works exceptionally well. However, things definitely get better from here, especially in FNAF 3. The Princess Quest minigames are some of the most popular FNAF minigames, and easily the most well known, and most explored, and deeply studied of all the Security Breach minigames. The soundtrack of the original sets the tone for all the other tunes that will come after, with this mysterious vibe that FNAF is so well known for. However, I do think that it is the weakest of the main three, and that's just because the other two are really good. And speaking of which, the second of our Princess Quest tunes, this one works slightly better than the original with a darker and more subtle approach. However, it only slightly beats out the original with the same plots that apply, so I will move on. The Emerald Waterfalls. Well, I didn't realize that blue was emerald, but I'm colorblind, so who knows? Anyways, this soundtrack is super peaceful and one of my personal favorites in FNAF world. It's got this super calming effect that none of the other worlds has. However, considering that this just is FNAF World Hub music, I can't really place it any higher. So, starting the top 30, which are tracks that really show off what the FNAF soundtracks are capable of, we have Sister Location's menu music, which is actually really cool. The menu music really sets the tone of the game ahead and has this really mysterious vibe to it that hasn't been seen since the original FNAF 1 game. The only reason this isn't higher is that the rest of Sister Location doesn't really meet up to this title screen's expectations, and for that, it gets to be at the number 30 spot on our list. The FNAF 6 menu works extremely well, getting the player super excited to blast into this experience, especially considering this game was a surprise of all things. This game's soundtrack is amazing, and this game does a great job setting the player up for an amazing experience, so for that, it gets to be where it is on the list. Thank You For Your Patience is the shop music in FNAF 6, and it's actually extremely effective. We get this really chill and calm music that sets the shop theme super well, and considering that you will be spending a bunch of time here, it has to work, and boy does it. It's super iconic and very memorable. However, if we're talking about iconic music, then we have to talk about our next piece. Here we are, the very first piece of Five Nights at Freddy's music ever heard by listeners. The FNAF 1 menu music. It is probably the most iconic piece of FNAF menu music ever, and for very good reason. Besides, like I said, being the first ever piece of FNAF music, it is also one of, if not the most effective title screen music for any of the FNAF games. There is this underlying fear and creepiness that none of the other games were able to capture nearly as well. And this is just another example of Scott kind of making the absolute perfect horror experience without even realizing it. There's not much else to say because the music kind of speaks for itself. It's iconic, and the only reason it's not higher is that it is just menu music at the end of the day, and it does border the line between being ambient and actual music. But besides that, it's a great track and deserves to be here on the list. So the Rockstar Row is actually, in my opinion, one of the coolest sections in the entire Pizzaplex, and the music that plays here is really good. This is also the end credit music as well, and it works super well. This super chill, almost French sounding version of the Security Breach main theme just makes me so happy inside. It's like they took the main Security Breach theme and put it into Ratatouille, which is awesome because that movie is awesome. Overall, this track is a tad underutilized, but it does a wondrous job and is one of my personal favourites in Security Breach. While this isn't the music track that Midnight Motorist is most well known for, it 100% is a banger and perfectly fits the minigame. This fast-paced and epic track drives the game and really makes you feel like you are driving down the road at top speed, even though it's obvious that your car isn't moving and instead the track ahead of you is. But still, I have to give this minigame points since it's one of FNAF's most famous minigames and houses a really famous secret. What else would you want after beating a super difficult challenge like Sister Location Custom Nights 1020 mode? A very awesome cutscene with a killer soundtrack to really tease the community with this awesome speech from Michael. It's really good, although in recent years, this teaser was somewhat forgotten, which brings it down. The daycare music in Security Breach is without a doubt the most amazing ambient soundtrack in the entire game of Security Breach, perfectly capturing the environment of the daycare while also being an absolute bop of a tune. It's light-hearted, goofy, and really fun. It's a shame that this track only appears in one section and then it is just never heard from again. It could have used some more love, just like the Sun and Moon as characters. FNAF World has a lot of amazing ambient music for its world, and the most effective of all the world's music is the Pinwheel Circus music, which is for good reason. This world is so relaxing, with beautiful chords and melodies really drawing you into the experience, and there's 100% a reason that this is the fan favourite of all the FNAF World hub tracks. Very relaxing song for a very relaxing game. Forgotten Sunday Show has become very well known in the FNAF community as sort of the official training tape music for employees and possibly even commercial music, playing during ads and all that. This music works exceptionally well at building the world of FNAF while also providing a bit of horror since this is the only temporary bit of safety you might experience during your playthrough. The fact it's so iconic by itself allows it to be this high up on the list, but there's also this dark undertone that allows it to secure the spot. This is a very underrated track to be sure, and one that I'm sure will make an appearance in many future games to come. Want to know what the Sound of Death is? Well, this is the closest we have to it in FNAF, and it's pretty cool. The Jack-in-the-Box music box that plays after the puppet escapes the music box, try say that 5 times fast, is extremely terrifying the first time you hear it. There's this sense of unknown that FNAF is built off of, and it works extremely well here. There's this sense of fear that washes over you, which is unlike anything from FNAF 2. It's probably the single most terrifying piece of audio from that game. However, it's brought down by the fact it loses its impact rather quickly after the first time, but it still deserves to be this high on the list. So, My Grandfather's Clock has become extremely synonymous with FNAF and especially FNAF 2. This music track is one of the most iconic in all of FNAF, and will most likely be the only piece of music you will hear in FNAF 2, if you don't die of course. I do think it's better than the Jack-in-the-Box music as it provides better ambience than the Jack-in-the-Box, and obviously it's way more iconic as well. However, it does have the downside of being a little bit overplayed, and actually can get annoying during normal gameplay. However, it's still super iconic and is one of the most recognisable sounds in all of FNAF, and for that, it gets a spot above the Jack-in-the-Box and the number 19 spot on our list. And now we have reached the peak music from Sister Location, which in my opinion is actually Blor's Lullaby, otherwise known as Crumbling Dreams, which in Sister Location plays whenever Blor is moving towards the player's location. It's an aura, and one that works exceptionally well for both the character of Blor and the gameplay of Sister Location, which I have said in the past, I think this minigame is the most effective in the entire game. This piece works as an evolution of the original music box in a way that's fresh and really creepy, allowing the horror to reach a new level. It really drives a level of fear into the player that the original music box just couldn't do, and for that, it gets to be where it is on the list. So now we have come to the FNAF 3 Good Ending minigame music, which I think combined are some of the best tracks in the entire FNAF series, and the weakest of these in my opinion is the Chica's Party track. Obviously, I don't think this track is bad at all. In fact, I think it's really amazing, and the old-timey music box fits perfectly with this 8-bit style old Atari minigame. It creates a lot of mystery, especially since it's not the kind of music you would expect from a game like this, and it just makes the player ask a lot of interesting questions and really invest the player into the story. And as the pieces go on, the story starts to unfold. This to me just feels like the awkward middle child of the story, but it still works really well. The Mangle's Quest music is the second of our FNAF 3 Good Ending music tracks, and actually the second song ever you will hear while doing this ending. It has a very similar vibe to the BB Air Adventure minigame, except that it's a little bit quieter and a bit busier than the BB track. It definitely serves its purpose well, however it's definitely one of the weaker tracks, or should I actually say, more of a stepping stone kind of track rather than a full-on piece that can stand on its own as well as the others, but I still think it deserves this spot on my list. The next FNAF 3 Good Ending minigame music is the Fredbear's minigame music. This track is the most mysterious of all the Good Ending minigame tracks. We get this mix between mystery and sadness, where it's the previous track and the next track combined into one, which creates this really interesting juxtaposition between the happiness and mystery of the first few tracks, and the sadness and depression of the last few tracks. Overall, this track is awesome, just like every single Good Ending minigame music, but it's not the best. Now, although for FNAF 3's Good Ending, I think the musical tracks have this progression and it gets better as time goes on, I think that BB's Air Adventure is one of the more effective tracks, since it's the track that starts the Good Ending minigames. It starts off the tone of the minigames, shows off the weird retro music box that gives off this uneasy feeling. This definitely is the happiest and most joyful of all the songs in the FNAF 3 Good Ending, but I think this track allows the others to build off it, and it makes the other tracks hit that much harder. The starting track for the Good Ending minigames has its place as number 14 on our list. Now, Security Breach obviously has an amazing soundtrack, especially when it comes to atmosphere and world building. However, there's definitely a lack of it when it comes to the various boss fights in the game. However, the DJ Music Man boss fight music is absolutely incredible. The metal guitar combined with the club music theme creates this absolutely epic soundtrack to a very awesome enemy. DJ Music Man has to be one of the most visually amazing animatronics to look at of all time, and this music absolutely captures his presence so well. The evolution of this track is actually amazing, and the way it ends with the final chase is absolutely terrifying and epic. Overall, it's not that scary and more on the epic side, but it definitely is one of the coolest moments in all of FNAF. So, if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that Smashing Windshields is probably my go-to intro song, and it has been for a while. And the reason that is that it's an absolute bop. But in all seriousness, Midnight Motorist is probably FNAF's most famous and yet mysterious minigame, and one that theorists to this day still haven't quite figured out. It is a very interesting track, as it almost feels out of place in the minigame that it takes place in. Being a secret minigame track, it almost feels too upbeat and not that mysterious, and in fact feels more like radio music playing in the car of Orange Man. This is a very interesting piece that does have a lot of mystery because it doesn't sound like it should be here, and considering how much of a bop this tune is, it's very interesting and immediately captures a player's attention when they enter this minigame. I think this music works well, and the fact that it's a tune as well makes it all the more epic. So with that, it gets to be number 12 on my list. Now, imagine a game where you have a final boss. Okay, well that's pretty easy. Now, imagine a game where that final boss is the developer of the entire game. Okay, that's pretty cool. Imagine the developer is this amazing looking blue guy. Okay, I'm liking where this is going. And then to top off this entire experience, you get one of the most epic pieces of boss music ever. Now, it's not quite as good as Mario Galaxy, but you get the idea. Stone Cold is, in my opinion, the most epic piece of Final Freddy's music. While you may not think that I'm for epic boss music in a horror game, this isn't a horror game, and in fact, it's just ambience. But it's done in a way that I think creates a very unforgettable experience. Obviously, in terms of impact on the franchise, yeah, this doesn't really have one, but it's unforgettable and an absolute bop. The setting of this fight makes you feel like you were doing a dance of death, since it looks like you're chilling in a nightclub of all places. It's super cool. Now, we are about to reach the top 10. The 10 pieces of Final Freddy's music that completely blow away a new standard for what FNAF as a series is capable of. So, before then, I want to quickly say that if you've stuck around for this long, in what I'm sure is a very long video, you should definitely consider subscribing and sharing this with your friends. Maybe like the video to help the algorithm to help me out. And at 100k, I'm personally thanking every single subscriber, so make sure that you make it into the 100k club. But anyways, enough self-promo, let's get into the top 10. Now, I know what you're thinking. Jerakai, how is a FNAF world track in the top 10 FNAF tracks of all time? Actually, you're probably more surprised with what I picked rather than the fact that I picked a FNAF world track to make it into the top 10. FNAF World is great, but in saying that, FNAF World's most effective track in my opinion is the underneath theme when you are travelling through the different subsections of the 8-bit underworld. This track and its subtle variations are probably the most FNAF-like pieces in FNAF World. This track was the start at what I like to call the mystery tracks. This more subtle, darker pieces of music that really allowed the player to question the world around them and to feel uncomfortable. This is the closest FNAF World gets to horror, since the game kinda sets it up perfectly. You're constantly told throughout the game that while travelling through this underworld, you need to be careful, since going down too many levels, you may never come back. There's this sense of wrongness down here, and as you go deeper and deeper as the music becomes more and more distorted the further you go down, it almost feels like you are dooming yourself to die, and yet you can't stop. It's an extremely effective piece of music and one that creates a unique and rare moment in a game that doesn't take itself too seriously. It's kinda poetic and it's really powerful. And for that, I think this track deserves to be in the top 10, and specifically the number 10 spot on our list. Bonnie's Lullaby is probably the most famous FNAF 3 track besides Happiest Day, which we will get to soon. When it comes to the good ending minigames, I believe the musical tracks get more and more effective as they go on, as the theme of tragedy gets more and more explained and shown to the player as we progress. Bonnie's Lullaby, in my opinion, is the most depressing of all the tracks, and in my opinion, is the build-up of all the sadness. This is the track that really shows how the children are feeling, and shows the actual hardship that they went through and continue to go through. This is the track that feels like a mother learning she's lost her child forever, and the child being told that they will never feel their mother's love again. This is the climax of tragedy and allows what happens to sink in. After this point, the story goes more towards the aftermath of the situation, while this track focuses on the present, which in my opinion makes it so effective. It's an amazingly powerful piece, and in my opinion, it deserves to be in the top 10. Now, you may be surprised to see that one of the Princess Quest tracks is this high up on the list, but I do have my reasons for this. There are 3 of these tracks, and this one is easily the most effective. There's something about this one that stands out from the rest. There's a reason this again is a very popular Theorist track. It invokes mystery, and it's very effective at doing that. We see again the themes of FNAF in this tune, and it feels like the most OG FNAF track in this entire game. We get this sense of mystery, tragedy, sadness, and horror as we play through this minigame, which this music plays in. I think the instrumental choices here are extremely well thought out, as we get a more refined version of previously mysterious tracks, which I think are extremely effective in FNAF, since FNAF is entirely built around the fear of the unknown. which is something I think the modern games do struggle with, including this game. However, I think Caught in a Loop does an amazing job capitalizing on this fear in a game that struggles to do so. Overall, while this isn't the best Security Beats track in my opinion, it's probably my personal favourite just due to how effective the mystery and horror themes are conveyed in this piece. Five Nights at Freddy's 3, in my opinion, if you couldn't already tell by all the previous good ending minigame entrances, has the most emotional and most effective lore and ending in the entire series. And I believe that Happiest Day to be an extremely depressing, emotional, and extremely powerful tune that perfectly captures the themes of this game, which in my opinion involves around the theme of tragedy. This is the kids' final send-off, the party they never got. It's a moment of comfort, a moment of completion, and a moment of letting go and moving on. It's a powerful track, and even though it's only a couple of notes on a music box, in my opinion, this being the most simplistic of all the music box tracks allows the listener to really connect with each individual note, and allows you to really take in what's happening on screen. It's super powerful. The emotions felt in this scene are amazing, and it's a super effective experience which is held together by just a couple of notes. The music box theme has always been a staple in FNAF, and there's a lot of reasons as to why it works. Through just simple juxtaposition to childhood innocence, to the fact that it's really calming, but in the wrong environment, which is why it works so well in a horror game. However, even though this is my personal favourite music box track in all of FNAF, I think it would be an absolute discredit if I didn't talk about the one that started it all. And here we arrive at the most popular piece of FNAF music of all time. So popular that there's even an entire Mandela effect based around it. The most memed sound in all of FNAF, and easily the most iconic. Being the first real piece of music present in FNAF, it's an absolute horror classic. This was the first piece of FNAF music that was really used to juxtapose the feeling of horror, terror, unease with all the children's pizzeria of fun. The music itself is actually really interesting, as the Toreador March is actually a victory song in bullfighting, being a song you sang before you slayed the bull, which, considering that Freddy is about to kill the player, seems extremely fitting. There's also the fact that the music box element would go on to become an absolute staple in the FNAF community, and even in the FNAF games as time went on. So to say that this track left its impact is an absolute understatement. This entire piece does an amazing job at setting up the horror and juxtaposing the scenario while having a terrifying meaning and leaving an undeniable impact on the franchise. So if that's the case, why is this track so low on the list? Well, for starters, it's not. It's number 6 of nearly 120 different songs, not to mention the number 1 FNAF 1 track, not that there are many to choose from. The real reason is that horror is a strong emotion, but one that's hard to replicate, and the impact of this track sure loses its impact after 10 whole years. Plus, it's a bit short, and if I'm being honest, I much prefer the emotional tracks like the Happiest Day we discussed previously. The real reason this track is where it is has to do with its impact. We wouldn't have gotten Happiest Day without Toreador March. However, in my opinion, while this is the strongest music box track in the entire series, it's not the strongest track in the entire series. However, I won't understate how great and impactful the Toreador March actually is. It did a lot, and for that, it deserves to be where it is on the list. To be completely honest, I actually didn't know that this game had music. FNAF 4 is literally known as the game with no music, but it turns out besides the title screen, there is one piece of music in the game, and that's the music that plays during the final cutscene of FNAF 4, where the crying child is sitting in the dark with Fredbear and his plushies, slowly fading away as he is comforted before he passes away. The music that plays here is actually extremely emotional and really drives the story to its unfortunate ending. It's such a sad moment, and it's a tragic ending, which is a theme that FNAF is really good at capturing. This music 100% speaks for itself, especially since there's no other music in FNAF 4, except for the very start of the game, which makes it show that it's the ending of the story. But as we know, it wasn't the end of the overall story. Security Breach is one of the most divided games in the entire series. Some people love it, some people hate it, but without a doubt, one thing you cannot deny is that the music for this game was absolutely incredible, and the main theme is the best example of that. I mean, for starters, this theme is this game's version of the Toreador March, since it shows up everywhere. However, I think the main version does the best job. It's bright, it's colourful, it's very 80s, and it perfectly fits the theme of the game it's from. In fact, I think this game has the most effective theme of all the FNAF games. Every single FNAF game has a piece of music it is really known for and actually defines it. FNAF 1 has the Toreador March, FNAF 2 has the Puppets music box and the meme noise, FNAF 3 has the Happiest Day minigame, FNAF 4 doesn't have music, Sister Location has Crumbling Dreams and Wadju 6, and FNAF 6 has a lot to choose from. I can't really decide, I guess smashing windshields or nowhere to run. But in my opinion, the Security Breach main theme does the best in defining itself. However, the only reason this music isn't higher on the list, despite the fact that it's an absolute banger, is that it's very limited in its overall impact of FNAF, since it only really serves as ambient music and a theme for a game rather than an actual piece of music that makes you think about the wider parts of FNAF or actually connects certain events together. But for what it's worth, this music and theme is still absolutely fantastic and definitely deserves to be where it is on the list. However, it didn't quite make the top 3, which is way ahead of everything we just talked about. Now, considering this track is just minigame music, you might be surprised to see it so high up as the third best piece of FNAF music ever. However, I do have a few really good reasons as to why. For starters, the minigame that Alchemist Fantasy plays in is one of the 3 lore minigames, and secondly, it's easily the most important of the lore minigames, as it depicts the murder of the first ever victim at Freddy's, Henry's own daughter Charlie. The music in this minigame is also just really good. Like the Princess Quest music, there's this sense of unease and mystery as the tone of the music is rather unpleasant and upbeat, but it just sounds a little bit off. And in my opinion, this vibe is extremely effective for horror games, as it allows the player to feel uneasy even at the lighter moments. This music also intrigues the player so much, as it hides so much mystery, sadness, and happiness, and it does an absolutely amazing job at what it does. And it can even be applied to FNAF as a whole, which is why, along with Caught in a Loop, it's a very common theory video soundtrack, as this music really intrigues the listener into the story. Overall, while Alchemist Fantasy is not my personal favourite, nor is it the best music, it is so damn close, and definitely leaves us with more questions, and does this in a fantastic way that not many other pieces of music can do. FNAF 6 was meant to be the end of the series, and the canon ending of this game has to be one of the most epic moments in all of FNAF. We get this insane moment where the animatronics are trapped inside the pizzeria, while the founder, Henry Emily, talks to the animatronics as the building burns to the ground. Henry talks about letting go and about moving on, saying that for one of you, the darkest pit of hell awaits. We see William get what he deserves, even though this already fucking happened, but regardless, it's a very hard-hitting moment, and all of this is topped up with this epic orchestral music that perfectly fits the vibe at the moment. It's this epic final moment where everything comes together, and no longer are the animatronics in control, and it is time to let go. It's a very powerful score that helps keep an even more powerful moment. However, despite all that, you're probably wondering, if this moment is only number 2 on the list, what could number 1 possibly be? Well, let's discuss that, because as amazing as this ending is, there's one more that I think did a way better job. Now for my number 1 pick, I decided to go with the good ending music from Five Nights at Freddy's 3, which I unfortunately cannot play since it is copyrighted, so unfortunately we'll have to listen to the remastered edition, but it still captures most of what I'm talking about. If you want to listen to the original, it's not that hard to find, I'll put it in the description. But this track, titled Don't Go, is one of, if not the most emotional piece in all of music and gaming, and especially in FNAF. The build up to this track is absolutely insane, with the FNAF good ending having amazing music as we saw before on the list. And as you completed more and more of these steps, you got to see the trauma and tragedy of what happened to these kids, and your stomach and heart drops as you experience firsthand the absolute depression of these kids. You visually see the suffering of these kids, and the music really enforces that feeling tenfold. Then, after everything, you finally set the kids' souls free, except for one final task, where you watch William Aphtin, or Purple Guy as he was known at the time, meet his fate in the spring Bonnie suit, being left to rot and die in pain like he deserves. And then we get the most powerful image in the entire series. The 4 heads of the original 4 animatronics with unlit eyes, showing that the kids have moved on from the suits and are free to rest. And then on top of all of that, we get this amazing piano score that really gives you that feeling of tragedy and freedom. You feel so sorry for what happened, and you are so happy that it's over. There's a level of completion that I don't think the other FNAF games were able to capture quite as well. Even comparing this to FNAF 6's ending with Connection Terminated, by comparison, that felt like this epic moment rather than the end of the entire series. This is the music that symbolizes the end of suffering, the end of pain, the end of the children's story, and in my opinion, that's way stronger than any other plot or part of the series. I have always seen the story to be focused on the wrong attributes, giving so much character to our killer when really, it's these kids that need our focus. And it makes it so much sadder and much more horrific. This is the most emotional and most effective piece of music in all of FNAF, and I will always stand by that. You may not agree with me, which is absolutely fine, but to me, this is the only track that deserves to be number 1 on my list. So, now that we have covered every single music track from Five Nights at Freddy's, before I end this long ass video, let's go over all the games and rank which ones have the worst and best soundtracks overall. In dead last with the worst soundtrack in all of FNAF, we have Ruin. This soundtrack completely fails from beginning to end to be a horror game, and it's really sad, and it just doesn't help that this soundtrack is so forgettable. Next up, we have FNAF 4, which is surprising to see considering that there's a FNAF 4 track in the top 10, but considering that there's only 2 tracks in the entire game, it doesn't seem fair to put it much higher. The next game is Ultimate Custom Night. Although it has some cool tracks, it's also kind of forgettable and not that interesting. The 2 Help Wanted tracks are, again, not that interesting. Some great tracks, but nothing special. Five Nights at Freddy's is next, and while all the tracks are bangers, it's not very important to the overall franchise, so I can't put it any higher. Into the Pit has a wonderful soundtrack, but it's not that special. FNAF 1 is next on our list, which may be surprising, but there's a reason for that. The main ones being that it's a bit too simple and only has 1 song like FNAF 4, but it's a bit stronger and really helped define the series. We then have FNAF 2, which is just a stronger and more consistent version of FNAF 1. We then have Sister Location, which actually has a few tracks that actually does a great job with its music. We then have FNAF World with a very consistent and epic soundtrack, but for the top 3, it gets even better. In third place, we have Security Breach, which has some of the best and worst music, but overall is super consistent and great. In second place, we have FNAF 6 with this amazing soundtrack, but a lot of ambient music with no real meaning, but every song is still a banger. And in first place, we have Five Nights at Freddy's 3, which has an absolutely amazing soundtrack and the best track in the whole series. Well, there we are, everything ranked. This video was absolutely insane to make, but I hope it was worth it. I know you guys said that you liked the longer videos, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe, guys. I'm kind of bad. Bye.